Our next speaker is who I really am quite excited to host here, is the journalist Vladislav Davidzon. I would like to say just a few words. Vladislav Davidzon has been covering from the front lines over the last month. He has visited and reported from Ukraine multiple times. Before the war started, he established the Odessa Review. I don't know how long before the war started, but 5 years. 5 years before the war started, he established the Odessa Review, which was a literary magazine that collected criticism, literature, and was kind of an expression of the growing cultural scene in Odessa. And he has published with leading publications, foreign policy. Recently, he has informed me this morning when I saw him that he is coming to us directly from Washington, D.C., where he was granted a prize. He is a non-resident fellow of the Atlantic Council. I think he will have some interesting things to say to us today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here. Lovely to get a chance to talk to academic colleagues. By the way, Professor, wonderful presentation. Absolutely, everything he said is absolutely correct. And I say that because I had to take my own family out twice. I've made 2 trips to take my wife's family out, and everything you said about the TDP is absolutely correct, which I've noticed, which I noticed when I had to fly for my relatives for it, and when I had to take my nieces who never had paperwork to the French embassy in Romania. They literally just gave out French visas to someone with a birth certificate. They're little, you could show up. It was madness in March. You could show up in Poland or Romania to any embassy with just paperwork issued from DMV or and then get a long-term TDP, and they literally in an hour issued my little nieces, who never had a passport, had never been out of the country, had never been issued anything. They just gave them on arrival in Romania paperwork to stay in France and issued them their first papers that any state ever issued them. I mean, they literally never left the city. They never had a passport. Nothing. They didn't have internal documents. They didn't have an internal anything. So, and when myself, I arrived multiple times during those crazy days in late February, March, on various European borders. I found myself translating very often into French from Russian, from Ukrainian into French into English at various border controls. And I was also stunned that often the person I'd be translating for was not a Ukrainian national, but they'd be the Georgian or Armenian or Moldovan husband of a Ukrainian woman with a Georgian passport and an Ukrainian laissez-passer or visa in Ukraine, and the French border guards would be like, okay, Georgian with a Ukrainian long-term séjour visa, okay, fine. I myself saw this with my own eyes, and I was amazed. So everything the gentleman tells you is absolutely correct. I just want to start that. Okay, so that's what I said does not count against my own time on the clock. Seconds. Okay. My thing. Or I can't. There's no internet access there. I can't open my phone, but it's okay. I'll just talk off the top of my head. So we're going to talk about food security. Obviously, Ukraine and Russia, between the two of them, they export something like 30% of the world's wheat. Well, that's a lot. So Ukraine is a country with about 40 million population. It's been decreasing since independence in 91, 92, from 53 million to 50 to 47 to 43 million. We haven't had a census since 2001 or 2002. I haven't had a census in a generation. So we don't actually know how many Ukrainians there are. And a certain number of them obviously were stolen by the Russian state in Crimea. 2.5, 3 million citizens were stolen from Ukraine. There probably were about 41, 42 million people on the territory of Ukraine when the war started. Obviously, there are a lot less now. We have those 7 million people who went into Europe, although I myself was counted 3 times, so I don't know. I was counted once by the Romanians, once by the Poles, once by the Hungarians, so I don't know. Don't you want numbers yourself? They're, statistics are always tricky. It is people registered with yes. Although it's interesting, a lot of people are going back. It's remarkable. My own father-in-law sat annoying me in my apartment for 2 months in Paris. I sent back. He's now in Odessa, and he's going to go back and renew his paperwork with the TDP and French authorities in November and December, just so he keeps a foot in the thing in case anything happens, in case our city does get taken. We don't want to have his status elapsed. So there are a lot of people going back and forth. There are a lot of people who had money and ran out of money actually and had to go back, or people who missed their husbands or their brothers or their cousins, because men are let out. A lot of women were sitting outside of the country for 6 months, and they said, "Okay, my city's okay. It's kind of getting difficult here. I miss home, and I'm running out of money." So a lot of millions of people have gone back. Kiev, when I was there this weekend, was at 75% population, where it was at 20% in February when I was there. So millions and millions of people are going back and forth across the border, depending on various factors. So that's important to understand. They're based on cell phone figures we have from cell phone companies. We can basically estimate how many people are living on the territory of Ukraine. Citizens or not, there are 37 million or so cell phone signals on the territory of Ukraine. We can extrapolate how many people live under the control of Ukrainian territory, not through a census, but through the phone company. Ukraine produces about 380 million people's worth of food security every year. This is a lot when you only have 40 million mouths to feed. 300 million people in the world are reliant on Ukrainian food exports. So when the Russian Black Sea fleet embargoed and blockaded the Black Sea ports in February 25th, 26th, food exports were stopped. Food prices all over the world became very high. There was food price volatility. There was incapacity for exporters to know how much they would export, incapacity for importers to know what the next year's contracts would be like. There was tremendous volatility on long-term futures for food contracts on the world's markets, the bourses of the world, and it also threatened to create an artificial famine. Now, the horrific thing about this, obviously, for any student of history, is the Holodomor, which is, of course, 1932 artificial famine that killed between 4.8 and 7 million Ukrainians, some Kazakhs and some borderland Russians in the border territories, like on the Podol, there were Russians who were on the other side of the border who starved to death. But this was an artificial famine that Stalin created, which starved millions of Ukrainians to death. This is the great psychic trauma of the Ukrainian political nation over the last 100 years. It is to us Ukrainians and us. Well, I'm a Ukrainian Jew. To Ukrainians, what the Holocaust show was to Jews. Creating an artificial famine where you're cutting off supplies to Eritreans, to Ethiopians, to Yemenites who are actually in the middle of a long-term famine, which is not man-made, but nature, God-made, brings back unfortunate and even horrific memories of what happened in 1932. So 300 million people's worth of grain is actually quite a lot. You can start to get large chunks of Africa, which rely on the Russian and the Ukrainian grain exports. For 5 months, there were long-term negotiations taking place under the aegis of the United Nations in Turkey. This was a special project of the leader of that country, Mr. Erdogan. These were trilateral negotiations between the Turks, the Russians, and Ukrainians, with the UN being sponsoring this in Ankara. Finally, on July 22nd, there was a deal signed. In exchange for sanctions relief, there would be a certain amount of grain and corn, only grain and corn, and some other foodstuffs. I think rapeseed, certainly not sunflower oil as far as I know, but just a few foodstuffs were allowed out of a green corridor out of the Black Sea into Istanbul. Now, this was a very tricky treaty to sign. I don't know if anyone knows this, but there's a 1936 treaty, Treaty of Montreux, which passed. Exactly, the passage of the Black Sea is actually the legitimate realm of the Turks. So they decide when the Bosphorus is open, they decide when the Bosphorus is closed. The Ukrainians, the day after the war began, petitioned the Turks, which is of course a NATO naval power, to close off entry to all military vessels to a new entry into the Black Sea. On the 27th of February, they did, might have been the 28th, it was the 27th of February, they fulfilled the request of the Ukrainians. The Black Sea was closed to new military vessels. This was a way for the Turks to avoid future problems with new Russian ships and new NATO ships coming in. So basically, there's actually not a lot of NATO assets outside of the Bulgarian and Romanian Navy, which are not huge. In the Black Sea, it's basically a Turkish lake with some Romanian and Bulgarian naval assets. And what's left of the Ukrainian Navy after 2014, when the Russians basically blew up and stole most of it, there's not really a Ukrainian Navy. It's a couple of small tugboats. They're medium-sized frigates, but it's not a real Navy anymore. The Turks are the ones who you have to negotiate with on anything to do with entry and egress of Ukrainian ports. There are 18 ports in Ukraine, 5 of them in Crimea, 4 or 5 on along the Mariupol, Berdyansk, Azov seabed, which have been obviously occupied. There are 3, the main 3, which are in Odessa, Yuzhny, Lychovsk, and Odessa port, which are the main 3. They're deep water ports. You can get a ship with an 18-meter bow into them. You can actually export very, very big tanker stuff out of there. And you have 4 or 5 little ports, river ports on the Dniester River next to Moldova and Romania, which is what the Ukrainians were using after we got Snake Island back in order to start re-exporting some of the foodstuffs into Europe. But those again are river ports. A ship with a hull which is deeper than 7 meters underwater cannot go there. You can't really export large volumes with small ships. And also, going up a river is harder than going down the sea. And also, Romania is very corrupt, and it's very difficult to export through a river what you can through deep water port on the sea. So, both the Russians and the Ukrainians mined the entry into Odessa. I went swimming illegally this summer in Odessa in the Black Sea. No, you're not supposed to. Everyone's going in the water looking for mines. No, you're waiting for the police to come and kick you out. I was actually with the mayor one time, and I said, "Aren't you the mayor? You're going to go swimming?" He said, "I'm the effing mayor. I can go swimming where I want." That's off the record. So both the Ukrainians and the Russians mined the Black Sea. We know where the Ukrainian mines are. We don't know where the Russian mines are. That's what Admiral Nishpapa, the head of our fleet, told me when I went to see him in July. He said, I don't actually know where their mines are. They got within 11 miles of the coast before the Ukrainians got all those harpoons and all those other rockets and all the HIMARS from the Americans and the Brits. They no longer are safe. By that I mean the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation, within 100 kilometers of the ports or of Ukrainian positions. So they cannot come anywhere near the Black Sea ports anymore to blockade them, but they can intercept ships within 100 miles away from the thing. It's actually the first time in probably several centuries that large a amount of Black Sea water is not claimed by anybody, because the Ukrainian ships are under threat from the Russian missiles, and the Russian ships are under threat from our missiles. 25,000 square kilometers of Black Sea water is unchaperoned by anybody. So this is actually probably the first time, I don't know, since the Phoenicians were sailing the Black Sea, that large amount of water in the Black Sea is not claimed by anybody. It's really an amazing time to be alive in many ways. If you want to start a maritime kingdom in the middle of the Black Sea, you should go now. There are small islands that are available, I imagine. The Green Corridor, which the Turks and the UN negotiated, goes past certain Ukrainian minefields. The Ukrainians are not willing to take their minefields down because obviously then Russian Marines are going to land on the beaches of Odessa. It's a bad thing. It's less of a threat now because of the advanced weaponry that we gave them, but still they're not ready to demine their own minefields. So what happens is, because I can't find the paper, I'm back and forth, running back and forth. Let's talk about what is actually in the treaty. The Russians really very much wanted sanctions relief. They got some of it. The Russians wanted to check ships coming in and out for weapons. The Ukrainians said absolutely not. The Ukrainians won that argument. Only the Turks get to check shipments once they get to Istanbul, but they can't check containers. Since they can't check containers, nobody actually ships anything except corn or grain. That's just a technical specification. It takes a lot longer to get a shipment out. You can imagine, for obvious reasons, insurance rates have spiked. For a very obvious reason, I think it's up to 8 times the insurance policy as it was before. Profits are down by a factor of 93%. $10,000 profit on a shipment a Ukrainian company was making is down to $1,000. Sailors don't want to go on these ships for obvious reasons. You can get blown up, and you think the anti-mine sweeping thing is serious. It's a lot more low tech than anybody imagined. I was utterly amazed when I saw the first time the way the Ukrainians do the mine sweeping. Can you imagine what they do? A little tugboat, a little Ukrainian Navy tugboat goes out ahead of the ship, and then a sailor gets out with a machine gun and scrapes the water in front of the ship with a machine gun. Can you imagine? I've seen this in my own eyes. It's amazing. Which would explain why a Romanian tanker got hit by a mine 4 years ago. It's not safe out there. In fact, the Romanian tanker saw the mine, and they just couldn't turn fast enough to get away quickly enough. It didn't sink the Romanian tanker, but there was damage. And again, this doesn't do anything for morale. This doesn't do anything for wanting captains to take their ships in. This doesn't do anything for sailors who demand triple rates to go into the Black Sea. This, of course, doesn't do anything for profitability. This doesn't do anything for international buyers who get grain which is 6 months old, and they say, what the hell is this? We've had instances of Lebanese buyers saying, absolutely not, I'm not accepting grain. I signed a contract in January, why are you bringing me grain which is months old? The Ukrainian embassy had to intervene and offer a 50% discount. It's not easy selling old grain, which you have to export through mines. It's just not easy, right? So the farmers are in a bad situation because their grain from last year hasn't been exported yet, and their grain from this year is just coming in now. And they don't actually, a lot of them, the poor farmers, don't have warehouses to store it. So they're sitting on 2 years worth of harvest with volumes decreased, because it's impossible to get more than 5 to 7 ships a day out of those ports. It's just logistically very difficult. And shipping companies don't want to, for the obvious reason, again, don't want to go in there. So the volumes are greatly reduced. It's very difficult, and it's so political that often the international shipping companies, when they have a choice of sending a vessel to either Greece and Ukraine, it's an obvious decision. So it's very difficult to even get ships and contracts to get grain out. It was a 120-day long visa, not a visa. We're taking a visa now. It was 120 days on the clock of the thing. I actually was. I was involved in some back channel negotiations on this. There were multiple people who didn't know about each other who were entrusted to run a plan C in case or a plan B and a plan C in case the thing didn't work out. When the treaty, as it happened, and we were all kept in the dark about what was actually going on. as it happened, I published an article in Foreign Policy on July 20th saying that this will be very difficult and the deal will be hard to come in, and even if it does, it's going to not last a very long time. I was kept in the dark by the foreign ministry about how far the negotiations. I thought there were 60% as opposed to 90% had come along in Turkey. So I was at the moment it was being signed, I was actually shepherding along a delegation of members of parliament of a friendly NATO country, which was putting together Plan C for a UN resolution. Luckily, my services were rendered moot. And on the night that the deal passed through, I was actually out with the general of the Southern Command, General Kovalchuk. He was showing me around. We were out in Kherson region, and we were getting bombed. And on the way out, we got hit by sniper rifle fire. We got ambushed on the way out. And so the exit from Kherson was very exciting, all too exciting. I get back to my hotel room in Odessa, and I read about the deal, and I said, this can't possibly. I said, I'm glad this happened, but this can't possibly stand. And the Russians are going to do something about this as early as tomorrow. And I fixed myself a martini to survive getting shot by the sniper in southern Kherson, and to celebrate the deal. I go to bed. 6 hours later, my hotel room, because I was I was a kilometer and a half from the port. The Russians, in order to celebrate the deal, they shot some rockets into the port. And I wake up and 6 hours later, my hotel room is shaking because I'm literally a mile from the port, from where the rocket, it's a mile's not very long. So I woke up and I said, oh, I was right. It's not going to last. The deal somehow did last. The Russians obviously wanted the concessions much more than they wanted to destabilize the Ukrainian export economy. They're probably going to negotiate very hard before the deal expires in mid-November in order to get more concessions. Obviously, the Russians have competing interests. They want to starve the Ukrainians of funds. They also don't want to create economic problems and social problems with their Egyptian allies, for example. The Egyptians are one of their main clients, and the Egyptians know full well who's starving them to death. So you have these competing interests on behalf on the Russian side. You kind of want the Ukrainians not to have any export, and you want to keep stealing the grain, and you want to export it yourself through your Syrian or your Lebanese connections into Africa. But you also don't want to look on TV as the new Hitler or the new Stalin making a new Holodomor. So they have these conflicting incentives, right? They ultimately decided that they prefer getting some sanctions relief and not having problems with their allies to flooding Europe with more Africans, which they could have done. This would have been a net positive for them. Thank you. So I'm grateful to Professor Itamar Mann, who I've known for many years, and we can discuss more of this during the Q&A. Thanks.